Designing Mothers is the 11th episode of the 6th season of Full House. This is directed by Joel Zwick, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. It's a pretty decent episode. It starts off quite sweetly with Becky feeding the boys lima beans. There's a package at the door, so she leaves the kitchen, and Michelle helps Nicky and Alex eat their lima beans by giving them to Comet. Becky realises what's happened when she comes in, largely because Comet is still sitting at the little table. And he rests his little head on the plate, and it's absolutely adorable. A very sweet way to start things off. We have a main narrative focusing on Vicky's mother. I'll come back to her in a second. We do have a subplot as well, where the radio station is wanting to switch to doing more with classical music. Jesse, in particular, is not very happy about this. And he and Joey does a great Flight of the Bumblebees impression, and he and Joey go down to the radio station. They meet Olsen, played by Martha Quinn, and she's handing out pink slips. And Jesse, I guess understandably, thinks that they're getting fired. So he makes this big scene and walks out of the building. And it turns out that Olsen was just giving out parking passes. And Joey realises this and goes after Jesse. And finally Jesse comes back in a little bit with his tail between his legs. And he pretends that he was just going to look at the new parking spot, and they explained, we thought you were giving out slips to fire people because we saw you giving Artie a pink slip. And Alison, we were just led to believe that Alison was sweet and wasn't going to make any dramatic changes. She was just giving out parking spaces. And it turned out she'd fired Artie anyway. So a bit of a roller coaster there. I think there's a good lesson here that you shouldn't jump to conclusions until you have all of the information. Of course, that's what Jesse did. And I think it's a nice padding for the main narrative. But the main narrative is the fact that Danny is now meeting Vicky's mother. This is Liz Larson, played by Jennifer Rhodes. And she seems not as warm and welcoming as one might like her to be. But she seems nice enough. She goes up to see the girls' rooms, and she's in decorating and design. So they kind of want her to redecorate their room. And Danny is uncomfortable with change, which honestly is something that we kind of configure about Danny. And then down in the kitchen, Kimmy, Steve, and DJ are there, and Kimmy happens to mention marriage. Danny is there alone with Liz, and as Steve carries Kimmy out, she's already done enough damage, so he carries her out. DJ obviously goes, and Liz thinks, yes, when are you going to marry my daughter? And she starts to interrogate Danny about this, and it wasn't an appropriate way for her to behave. And she decides to apologise for her nature, for her behaviour, by redecorating the girls' bedroom. Now, I do have a question. How can you redecorate an entire bedroom without anybody, certainly Danny, finding out? It's a little unbelievable, because it would have taken some time. I can't imagine he was out of the house that long, but nevertheless, the room is redecorated. It looks really nice, gorgeous colours, and the girls, which is the most important thing, the girls are very excited. Danny's not happy. He doesn't like change, but it's not his bedroom. So realistically, he doesn't get a say. And there's no problem with the redecoration because it doesn't cost him anything. Clearly, it's not using up his time, and it doesn't disrupt his day. Clearly, he had no idea what was happening. So there is no negative about redecorating that bedroom. Obviously, you should ask the parents' permission before you do it, but I do think Liz's heart was definitely in the right place. She wanted to do something nice to make amends, so she redecorated the girls' bedroom. It would make them happy, and it would save Danny time and money if he were to do it later on. So I don't think she did a bad thing. I do think Danny overreacted. Yes, I do think it's fair that she should have asked him before redecorating a room in his house, but I do think he overreacted, and he was led by his own feelings of fear of change rather than what was best for Michelle and Stephanie. And Danny, it's obviously not about the room. He talks with Vicky, and Vicky thinks he's getting angry because the room was redecorated. It's too much change. But I think it's very clear to us as a viewer that really it's about this wedding that his mother, her mother rather, is expecting them to have. But he doesn't vocalise this to Vicky. And I think we have quite a lot of clear messages in this episode that communication is key. There are several things in this episode that would not have played out the way they did if people had just learned to communicate. If Jesse had communicated with Olsen, or at least waited till he had all of the information. and if Danny had actually communicated with Vicky that her mother was telling him to propose to her, ostensibly. And they didn't. They just had this big fight. They didn't talk it out because Danny didn't say anything. And they break up. And unfortunately, Michelle and Stephanie can't sleep in their bedroom because it's the breakup room. It's what caused the fight between Vicky and Danny. I also think that that's lovely approval for Vicky, that they're so upset that Danny and Vicky have broken up because of their bedroom, that they're not willing to sleep in their bedroom. If that's not acceptance of their father's girlfriend, I don't know what is. And they have to hatch a plan to try and get them back together. So they do. They phoned Vicky to say Michelle's head was stuck in a fence. So, of course, they think Vicky will come over. Danny will see her. They will talk. And, well, Vicky did come over. But she brought the fire department, which is fair enough. Absolutely fair enough. If you hear a child's head stuck in a fence, then fair enough. But obviously that's not what Stephanie and Michelle counted on. So they rush Michelle to the yard to make it look like her head's stuck. And Kimmy's barbecuing, I think, sardines. Was it kipper sardines? I think it was sardines. She was barbecuing sardines, which is a very random thing to be doing. And Danny's in his wetsuit. The firefighters are there, and Michelle's obviously not stuck. It's quite a chaotic scene. And Danny and Vicky ultimately start talking about things, and Danny realises that Vicky didn't even know her mother mentioned the wedding. Again, if they'd just communicated, he would have realised this a long time ago. And all's well that ends well. It's a fun episode, really, really well done. I think Michelle and Stephanie were an absolute delight. Also, I think Liz is a very likeable character. I don't think she necessarily has the best approaches all of the time, but I did like her. Generally, from start to finish, I liked her, or at least I thought she was interesting, and I never really thought that she was evil. I never thought she came across as intentionally nasty. She just maybe had some ways of doing things that need to be softened around the edges a little bit. And ultimately, I think it's a great episode. I have no complaints. Designing Mothers is a pretty solid episode of Full House, and I'm sure it's one that I'll always really thoroughly enjoy.